We often think silence is weakness, but in truth, silence is power. The right silence at the right moment can save relationships, protect your peace, and make you stronger. Today, let's talk about 5 situations in life where silence isn't just golden, it's necessary. Silence is not about ignoring people. It's about protecting yourself, your energy, and your relationships. First, be silent when you're angry, because anger loves fast words, and fast words usually cut the deepest. Take a breath, stay quiet, and speak when your calm is returned. Second, be silent when you don't know the full story. Jumping in too early can make you look foolish. Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing until you know the truth. Third, be silent when the urge to brag hits. Pride talks, but humility listens. The people who truly matter will see your actions without you announcing them. Fourth, be silent when someone else is speaking. Listening doesn't just show respect, it teaches you what you'd miss if you were busy talking. Fifth, be silent when your words won't help. Not every moment needs your opinion. Sometimes silence keeps peace longer than the perfect argument ever could. Silence isn't about saying nothing. It's about knowing when saying nothing is the strongest thing you can do. When anger shows up, it doesn't knock on the door and wait for permission. It bursts in, it's fast, it's loud, and it wants to take over every word that comes out of your mouth. And when you let anger drive the conversation, the words don't come from your heart, they come from heat, words that aren't filtered, words that don't consider the damage, words that may feel satisfying in the moment, but turn into regrets the second the fire cools down. That's the problem with speaking when you're angry. You can't take those words back. You can't rewind the conversation. You can't unsay what was said in the middle of that storm. And most of the time, the words that anger picks aren't the ones that fix anything. They're the ones that break it even more. Silence, in that moment, feels unnatural. It feels like you're holding back when everything inside of you is begging to push forward. But silence isn't weakness. It's strength under pressure. It's giving yourself the space between the spark and the explosion. And in that space, you get to breathe, you get to think. You get to remind yourself that this moment, this heated, boiling, sharp-edged moment, is temporary, but the impact of what you say is not. When you stay silent in anger, you're not ignoring the issue. You're protecting the relationship, protecting yourself, protecting the version of you that doesn't want to cause harm. Because the truth is, silence in anger is not about bottling things up forever. It's about choosing not to speak in the heat of the fire, but waiting until the flames cool so you can respond with clarity instead of chaos. Think about the times you've spoken in anger before. The slammed doors, the sharp tones, the phrases you wish you could delete from someone's memory. Anger doesn't care about the long term. It only cares about winning the short term. Silence shifts that power. Silence lets you win not the argument, but the bigger picture, peace, respect, and self-control. Silence doesn't mean you don't have something to say. It means you're wise enough to say it later, when your words can actually be heard instead of just adding to the noise. Anger wants quick reactions. Silence gives you time for real responses. Anger is fast, silence is steady. Anger cuts deep, silence protects. When something happens around us, the first instinct is to react. We hear a piece of information, see half of a situation, or catch a glimpse of someone's behavior, and immediately the mind starts filling in the blanks. It builds a story. It connects dots that aren't really there, creates reasons that may not exist, and convinces us that we know enough to respond. But the truth is, most of the time, we're operating on fragments. A sentence without the full conversation, an action without the context behind it, a headline without reading the article. And when you respond based on fragments, you're not responding to reality. You're responding to assumptions. That's where silence becomes more powerful than speaking. Silence is not about being passive. It's about being patient. It's the choice to step back and hold your words until you have a clear picture of what's actually happening. Because once words leave your mouth, they don't come back. They carry weight. They shape the way people see you and trust you. If you rush into speaking without the full story, you risk saying something unfair, something that puts blame in the wrong place, something that damages relationships or your own credibility. It's not about being right in the moment. It's about being wise over time. Think about how quickly stories spread today. A rumor, a social media post, a snippet of a video without the beginning or the end. People see it and immediately jump into the comments with strong opinions, harsh judgments, and bold statements. And yet days later, when the full truth comes out, most of those loud voices go quiet. The silence they should have chosen at the start becomes the silence of embarrassment after realizing they were wrong. That's why silence at the beginning matters. It keeps you from being part of the noise, and it lets you stand steady when the real facts surface. And it's not only about public situations, it's also personal. A friend cancels plans last minute, and you feel disrespected. A coworker seems cold in a meeting, and you assume they're upset with you. A family member says something short, and you take it as criticism. Without the full story, you fill in the blanks with your own narrative. Maybe your friend had a rough day and just couldn't bring themselves to go out. Maybe your coworker is stressed about something that has nothing to do with you. Maybe your family member was just tired and didn't mean their tone the way it came across. If you respond too quickly, if you speak out of assumptions, you risk hurting people who never meant to hurt you. But when you stay silent long enough to ask, long enough to listen, long enough to understand, you realize most of the stories you made up in your head weren't even true. Silence in the unknown is discipline. It's choosing to let the truth arrive before you decide what to say. It's holding back the urge to fill the gaps with words that might do more harm than good. It's giving yourself the grace to wait, to learn, to listen before stepping in with a voice that carries not just sound but sense. The urge to brag usually shows up when we want to be seen, when we want people to notice the hard work we've put in, the progress we've made, the battles we've fought quietly behind the scenes. It's human to want recognition. It's human to want others to validate the effort that often goes unseen. But the problem with bragging is that the words don't land the way we think they do. What feels like sharing our pride often sounds like seeking approval. What feels like letting people know our worth often comes across as asking them to measure it. And in that space, silence becomes a far stronger choice. Silence in moments of pride is not about denying your accomplishments. It's about letting them speak for themselves. Because real achievement doesn't need a megaphone. People can see it in the way you carry yourself, in the results that follow your actions, in the consistency of your work. The loudest noise you can make is often no noise at all, because the truth is, the more you talk about your success, the less powerful it looks. There's a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need an audience to clap for it, because it's already enough. Bragging often comes from insecurity. When we don't feel enough on the inside, we try to prove it on the outside. We stack our accomplishments like trophies on a shelf, hoping someone else will look and confirm what we're afraid to believe ourselves. But silence in that moment forces you to ask a harder question: why do I need to say this? Am I looking for recognition, or am I looking for reassurance? And if it's reassurance, maybe the silence is an opportunity to build that security from within instead of depending on others to hand it to you. Think about the people you respect most, the ones who carry influence, the ones who've made an impact. Most of the time, they don't have to say much about what they've done. Other people talk for them. Their actions become their story. Their consistency becomes their reputation. And that's the kind of respect that lasts, not the temporary kind that comes from bragging and boasting, but the permanent kind that comes from silence backed up by proof. There's also a deeper kind of power in letting others discover your achievements on their own. When someone finds out what you've done without you telling them, their respect grows naturally, not forcefully. It feels authentic, not staged, and that authenticity is worth more than any applause you could ever demand. Silence in those moments is not hiding, it's allowing your success to speak in a language that's louder than words. Bragging creates distance between people, but silence creates curiosity. Bragging makes people compare, but silence makes them notice. Bragging seeks attention, but silence earns respect, and the respect that's earned quietly is the kind that stays. One of the most powerful forms of silence isn't the silence we use for ourselves, it's the silence we give to someone else. When another person is speaking, silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes a form of respect. It's what you're saying matters enough that I don't need to compete with it. In conversations, we're often more focused on what we're going to say next rather than on what the other person is saying now. We prepare our response, rehearse our argument, or wait for a gap to jump in. And in doing that, we miss the weight of their words. Being silent when someone else is speaking is choosing to listen, not just to hear. It's creating space where they feel valued instead of dismissed. Silence in that moment is not passive, it's active. It's paying attention not only to the words, but also to the pauses, the tone, the emotion behind what's being said. Sometimes the most important part of what someone is telling you isn't the actual words, but the hesitation between them. The way their voice cracks slightly, the way their eyes look away, the way their hands fidget as they speak. You don't catch those details if you're filling the air with your own noise. Silence gives room for the full story to surface, for the unspoken things to come through, and for the other person to feel truly heard. When you cut someone off, even if you don't mean it harshly, the message it sends is that your words matter more than theirs. It says your thoughts can't wait, that what you have to add is more important than what they're still trying to express. Over time, that kind of interruption doesn't just end conversations, it shuts people down. They stop sharing, they stop opening up, and what could have been trust slowly turns into distance. Silence, on the other hand, invites more. It encourages honesty because people feel safer knowing they won't be rushed, judged, or ignored halfway through their sentence. It's also worth noticing that listening doesn't mean agreeing. You don't have to accept every word as truth to stay quiet while someone else is speaking. Silence doesn't equal approval, it equals patience. It gives you the time to fully understand before you choose how to respond. And often, when you give that space, you realize you don't need to respond as strongly as you thought you did. Many conflicts shrink when people feel heard, and silence is the bridge that allows that to happen. Think about how it feels when someone listens to you without interrupting. You feel respected, you feel valued, you feel like your perspective matters. That feeling builds connection, and connection is what keeps relationships strong. By staying silent while others speak, you're not just holding your tongue, you're giving a gift. You're offering presence, attention, and dignity in a world where everyone is fighting to be heard, but few are willing to listen. There are moments in life when words feel like the answer to everything. We want to fill the silence with advice, with explanations, with opinions, because silence feels uncomfortable. But sometimes the best thing we can do is recognize that our words won't actually help. Not every situation needs commentary. Not every problem needs immediate advice. Not every silence needs to be broken. And when we push ourselves to speak anyway, we often make things heavier instead of lighter. Silence in those moments isn't avoidance, it's wisdom, it's restraint, it's choosing not to add noise where clarity hasn't even formed yet. When someone is hurting, for example, it's natural to want to comfort them with words, to offer quick encouragement, or to try to explain why things will eventually get better. But often, those words don't land the way we hope. They don't heal, they feel shallow. Because in deep pain, people rarely want speeches. They want presence. They want someone who can sit with them in the weight of what they're feeling without trying to fix it in one sentence. Silence in those moments communicates something words can't, that you're here, that you care, and that you don't need to fill the space to prove it. There are also times when words add fuel to conflict instead of putting out the fire. An argument that's already heated doesn't need more words tossed into it. In fact, the more you talk, the more chances there are for misunderstanding, misinterpretation, and escalation. Silence in those moments is not surrender, it's strategy. It's recognizing that no matter how well crafted your sentence is, it won't calm the storm. Sometimes silence is what allows emotions to settle so that real communication can happen later when the timing is right. Even in everyday conversations, there are countless moments when our instinct is to speak, but silence would serve us better. When we don't fully understand the issue, when we're tempted to give advice that hasn't been asked for, when we want to add our opinion just to feel included. Words in those moments don't create value, they create clutter. They make the conversation about us instead of the person who actually needs to be heard. Silence, on the other hand, keeps the space open for others to step in, for thoughts to develop, and for solutions to surface naturally. And sometimes silence is just a form of humility. It's admitting that you don't have the answer, that you don't need to have the last word, that you don't need to fill the space just to prove you're paying attention. It's letting go of the pressure to fix everything with language and allowing the moment to be what it is. Silence gives room for healing, for understanding, and for peace in places where words would only create more noise. Gossip has a way of pulling people in without them even realizing it. It starts small, maybe just a casual comment about someone who isn't in the room. Then it grows detail by detail as others add their own pieces, whether true or exaggerated, and before long, what was once just a whisper turns into a conversation built on assumptions, half-truths, and sometimes pure invention. In those moments, silence becomes more powerful than any contribution you could make. Because silence is not only the refusal to participate, it's the refusal to feed something that harms both the person being talked about and the people who choose to spread it. The tricky thing about gossip is that it feels harmless. People disguise it as sharing, as venting, as just talking things through. But underneath the surface, gossip is rarely neutral. It plants seeds of doubt. It shifts how people view someone, even if they never meet them. And once those seeds are planted, they're difficult to pull out. Staying silent when gossip arises is choosing not to water those seeds. It's refusing to be the reason someone else's name gets dragged further into the dirt. Silence also protects your own character, because the way you talk about others says more about you than it does about them. When you engage in gossip, even if only for a few sentences, you show people around you that you're willing to trade someone else's dignity for temporary connection. But when you stay silent, when you don't add to the pile, it communicates something different. It tells people you're not someone who entertains negativity, you're not someone who needs to build connection at the expense of another person's reputation, and you're not someone who sees silence as weakness. You see it as strength. And silence doesn't only protect the person being talked about, it protects the room too. Because gossip never really stays contained. The same people who gossip to you will gossip about you. When silence shows up instead of agreement, it disrupts that cycle. It signals that you're not a safe place for rumors to land. Over time, people begin to notice. They may even be more careful around you because your silence made it clear that you don't play the game. That's not distance, it's dignity. There's also the truth that gossip often leaves out context. People repeat the parts of a story that make it interesting, not the parts that make it accurate. They share the drama, not the details. And when you stay silent, you give yourself the gift of not carrying around a version of events that's likely incomplete or wrong. You free yourself from believing and repeating things that only distort reality. Silence in the face of gossip is not about judging others for speaking. It's about choosing a higher road for yourself. It's the discipline of letting the conversation pass by without your voice in it, the strength of knowing that what you don't say often matters more than what you do, and the quiet confidence of protecting your own integrity by refusing to add another word to the noise. There are moments when the words sitting on the edge of your tongue feel sharp. They feel like they carry power, like they could cut straight through the situation and make your point impossible to ignore. And in those moments, it can be tempting to let them out, to release that sting, to say exactly what you know will hit the hardest. But the truth is, not every word we think needs to be spoken, and not every thought that comes to mind is meant to be shared. Silence in those moments is a form of protection. Protection for others, yes, but also protection for yourself. Words can do damage in ways that actions sometimes can't. A bruise can fade, but a sentence can replay in someone's mind for years. People rarely forget the exact phrasing of encouragement, but they almost never forget the exact phrasing of cruelty. And even when the sting fades, the memory of how those words made them feel can linger long after. Choosing silence when you know your words would wound someone is not weakness, it's discipline. It's the ability to put a pause between thought and action and to ask yourself whether the release is worth the regret that often follows. It's easy to justify hurtful words in the moment. You tell yourself they deserved it, they started it, they needed to hear the truth. But sometimes the truth, spoken with sharpness, isn't truth at all. It's just anger dressed up as honesty. And silence is what keeps you from confusing the two. Silence gives you the chance to cool down, to evaluate not just what you want to say, but how it will land on the other person, how it will shape the relationship, how it will echo in the future. Because once words leave your mouth, you don't control where they go. You don't control how many times the other person replays them in their head. You don't control whether they forgive them quickly or carry them quietly for years. Silence in those heated moments also gives you a chance to consider whether what you're about to say will build or break. There are times when speaking brings healing, when even hard truths can mend and strengthen. But there are also times when speaking is nothing more than salt on a wound. The challenge is knowing the difference, and silence is what creates the space to figure it out. Without that pause, everything becomes reaction, and reaction rarely brings repair. Even in small situations, the decision to stay quiet when your words would harm shows strength. In disagreements with people you love, intense conversations at work, in moments where someone frustrates you beyond measure, silence is often the only thing standing between a relationship that recovers and a relationship that fractures. Silence doesn't erase the problem, but it protects it from being made worse. And sometimes that protection is the most important gift you can give, even when it doesn't feel satisfying in the moment. There are times in life when words feel unnecessary, when speaking only takes away from the weight of what you're trying to show. Words can promise, they can explain, they can try to convince, but words alone don't carry proof. Actions do. Actions are the evidence, the follow-through, the real measurement of what you stand for. And in those moments, silence becomes powerful. It allows the action itself to do the speaking. It allows what you do to carry more weight than anything you could have said. When you tell someone you'll be there for them, that's one thing. When you actually show up when they need you, that says far more than the sentence ever could. When you say you're committed to change, those are easy words to string together. But when your behavior shifts, when your patterns evolve, when the people around you can see the difference without you having to point it out, that's when the message lands. Silence in those moments isn't emptiness, it's trust. It's trusting that what you've done or what you're doing is loud enough on its own. Too often, people fall into the trap of talking about what they're going to do rather than just doing it. They announce their goals, outline their plans, repeat their intentions as if the talking itself is progress. But talking doesn't change anything if it isn't followed by action. And silence in those moments is what separates the dreamers from the doers. It's the quiet that comes from knowing you don't need to broadcast what you're working on, because eventually the results will show themselves. There's also a kind of humility in letting your actions speak instead of your words. When you talk about everything you've accomplished, you're inviting people to measure your claims. When you quietly live those accomplishments, you're inviting them to notice for themselves. And what people notice on their own always carries more weight than what you try to convince them of directly. Silence, in that sense, is not about hiding. It's about allowing authenticity to reveal itself without force. In relationships, too, actions matter more than words. You can tell someone you love them 100 times, but if your actions don't match, the words begin to feel hollow. On the other hand, small gestures, listening, showing up, being consistent, speak volumes without requiring a single sentence. Silence creates space for those gestures to be felt instead of drowned out by talk. Even in conflict, silence can shift the focus from defending yourself with words to proving yourself with actions. Instead of arguing that you've changed, you simply live differently. Instead of insisting that you're trustworthy, you consistently act in a way that proves it. Over time, those actions become undeniable. They don't need an explanation, they don't need a speech, they don't need repetition. They just need consistency. Silence is not about weakness, and it's not about avoidance. It's about strength under control. It's knowing when words will build and when they will break. It's choosing presence over reaction, discipline over impulse, wisdom over noise. In anger, silence protects you. Without the full story, silence saves you. In pride, silence humbles you. In conversation, silence respects. In conflict, silence steadies. In gossip, silence shields. When your words can wound, silence guards. And when your actions are enough, silence speaks louder than anything you could ever say. The moments you choose silence are the moments you choose peace. And peace, in the long run, is always louder than words.